What's happening, guys? We are back with yet another video. I will be posting another one later today. It'll be about how to know if you're overwatering your plants. So we'll be going over that later. And
Hey, Gypsy.
Kat was playing with the demonstrations. So we're gonna go ahead and get started. Today's gonna be for now in this video. It's gonna be about cloning. A lot of people ask me all the time, how do you get all these plants that you have? Well, one of them would be the free seeds video. If you haven't seen that, go ahead and stop this. Go watch that, and then come back here for this one, because this one is going to be cloning. Cloning is another way to get pretty much free and an insane amount of plants in just no time at all. So, cloning can be done a million different ways. At the end of the day, it's what it takes, whatever it takes, to establish roots on a particular plant. I've cloned anything from tomatoes to herbs to flowers to ferns, squash, a couple of other things like I did a blackberry bush a couple of times. Those are going to be the clones in the garden. Again, if you haven't seen that, stop this. Go ahead and go check that one out. Lilo. So our first example is really easy. Tomatoes. Tomatoes are insanely easy to clone. If you haven't cloned yet, try them. They're a great beginner plant. See, tomatoes have this very interesting thing to them. Anyone that's familiar, let's see if we can get one. I don't know if y'all can see that. There's kind of like hairs going up and down the sides. Well, those hairs, I do not know the scientific term right offhand, but basically, whenever water touches it, or if the humidity is right, they will begin to grow roots in those areas. The hairs are kind of feeling out. So the tomato is actually a weed, and it's a really aggressive grower if you know the history behind it. Even though, yes, we do trellis it, it is common for us as humans, it is a common practice. The tomato itself prefers to grow across the ground all the way until it reaches a cliff or some sort of high point. Where it can't climb anymore. And then the idea is either A, it's going to stretch across and then drop its new seeds here to continue and get a bigger area next year, or it's if it was to hit a cliff or some sort of high point, it would drop those seeds down. And if it had a cliff, a more accurate representation would actually be if a bird went and ate it. See, tomato seeds, and just inside of the tomato, that gooey part in the center is actually a growth inhibitor. So there's a fermenting process for certain types of foods such as tomatoes. And the idea is that if a bird was to eat that fruit and then eat the seed, it would go through their system eating away at the growth inhibitor. So whenever they were to go to the bathroom, the sac that it would fall in, the birds actually poop into a liquid sac. It would splatter, whenever it falls, planting the seed and fertilizing it. So it's kind of like an initial starter. That's the reason birds are so important to the environment. Animals are a very common way for seeds to transfer from one location to another. So in terms of invasiveness, if tomatoes were given the opportunity, they can and generally are very invasive, but they're also great in habitat for small critters, and they also set up for other types of grasses and stuff. So all of that in mind, that's why it is so easy to clone a tomato plant. Now this fern is a Foxtail Fern. I cloned it today. I'll actually show it to you. All I did for something like this is I'll rip the bottom section. All I did was just take my fingers and just pull down, just pinch and pull. It's not beautiful. You can see there's actually some growth still on there, and that's good because this is going to help keep the plant alive. And then I'm just going to push that in there so it's nice and firm, standing up. Now something like this, a lot of times I'll put it in a low light setting. I like to control the environment a little bit, so I actually put it, which is right over here, my vegetating bin. So basically it's got clones and seedlings, things that just aren't ready to go outside quite yet. So this is going to actually be a lemon tree. So trees are different. When you get into stuff like this, a lot of times it really, really helps if you have a rooting hormone. So believe it or not, this was actually a failed clone that I had. I was trying a new cloning method on the plant, doing a root ball. If you don't know what that is, basically it's where you take some sort of device and you make it black, like to where, you know, using trash bag or painting it black, it just to keep light out. So that way roots will be more stimulated to grow. And it generally just clips right on the plant, so you don't have to kill your plant, or you don't cut it or anything. You just put the root ball right on, and it's got dirt in there or some sort of like a seed starter mix, just something for moisture. And a lot of times, if you do have it, you go ahead and scrape with the knife like flat, something like this. You just kind of scrape one side, put some rooting hormone in there. There's so many different types of rooting hormone. We particularly use a common one you can find at Walmart, generally used for tomatoes, but since we don't use it for tomatoes, we use it for all of our plants. So anyways, I put the root ball on. We waited about a month. Trees generally take a couple months, but I wasn't impressed with the root ball, so I went ahead and took it down. Well, whenever that happened, we did have cats and dogs and bees and birds and all kinds of stuff going, and it was in the greenhouse, our sun bubble at the time. And again, if you haven't seen that, go ahead and stop, go back to that video where I did the homestead tour, just so you kind of know what I'm talking about there. And generally speaking, it was kind of a humid environment because it was a sun bubble, and I didn't really open the top vents if I didn't have to, just to kind of extend the life of that particular sun bubble. So what happened is either a cat or a bird or something broke the limb off of my lemon tree where I was trying to do the root ball, like right there. It snapped, it just aged, it wasn't doing too well. So generally when that happens, we just take it and we throw it down in the bottom. Well, this particular time, I just kind of shoved it in there. I didn't really pay attention to it. I honestly forgot about it for about a month or so. We were moving all the plants out of the sun bubble, and my significant other stopped me and she said, hey, what's with this, limb? Because she knows I do random projects and she can't normally keep up with them. All of them anyways. So I was explaining to her, I was like, oh, and it's probably dead. So I just like, we'll go ahead and pull it up. So I just pulled the whole stick out, and it actually had roots all over the bottom. And I was like, oh, so now we are proud owners of a tree clone. So I went and got another bin, and then I just buried in the bin. And I've been putting it with our seeds outside, which is on a table, and they only get, afternoon light from direct light for an hour or two. It just kind of keeps them cool and available. And I know it's starting to come back because, as you can see up here, there's not really any thorns. All the thorns have fallen off. But right here, the thorns, I mean, they are coming back aggressively. So that tells me it's kind of starting to rehabilitate a little bit. There's a good one there. So the thorns I'm thinking they'll probably come back before the leaves come back. But even if they don't, we'll probably do it again. Our lemon tree isn't really producing right now. And during beginning of season, if I can, I'll generally clone new growth and let it grow out a little bit, because I just try to clone everything. There's no point in wasting it. If we end up not liking the plant, I can just feed it to the chickens. So for us, it's generally worthwhile to kind of keep those genetics going. Another version of cloning that you can also try is going to be a lot like the tomatoes here. So these are just some sunflowers, and generally speaking, you're not going to clone flowers. It's not always going to work, but sometimes it does. And like I said, we have our cloners kind of just going year round. That way, worst case scenario, we end up with some cool genetics. After these started dying, I have a friend, another gardening friend. He's going to hook me up with either some standard sunflowers like this or some mammoth sunflowers, which are insanely huge, and we kind of want to use them to kind of give the chickens a little extra feed, just kind of where weeds would normally grow anyways. So this mix is going to be a little unique since I knew there wasn't a whole lot of hope here. But I added some rooting hormone. I also added honey and aloe plant. So we grow our own aloe, those of you that don't know. And aloe is an amazing rooter. I've done some different styles of rooting, and generally speaking, all of them have worked. The only reason I use honey, and I do use local organic honey, is because it's like an antibiotic kind of, it's an antibacterial, I believe. And so basically, I don't use a whole lot. I just use enough to kind of help disinfect the mix. The cleaner the mix, the better the cloning solution, essentially. Um, you really don't want anything that's going to be too nasty, and you don't want something that's going to be cause a fungus or a rot, because that can always infect other plants. You know, it can become a real issue. So that is an option. Now, in terms of bushes, my trees, I didn't have as great of an experience with this, but in terms of my bushes and certain herbs and stuff, I actually loved this rooter I made. So I took a shoebox, just the standard plastic shoebox. You can see I haven't even cleaned it out. I just got it out of storage today. So what I did is I have a knife for melting. It's just a dull old knife. It's real thick. I like to use it for melting projects, and I'll heat up the tip with a torch or a gas stove or something. Just anything that I can provide a decent amount of heat with. And I just kind of melted 2 holes here. Now these 2 holes, and I prefer, if I could have done it differently, I would have actually put another one over here instead, cross. And the reason is because this is where the bubblers went in. So this is the tubing, the air tubing would go through here. Now in terms of bubblers, I used a couple different types. I have used some of these, but the longer versions. They're just in my fish tanks right now. Since we're not using the cloner, might as well use them. But these worked really well for me. I have used some of these individual bubblers, but in terms of this setup, 10 out of 10 would recommend. Now, if I was doing something like the sunflowers here in a cup or a jar, which I have done before, I personally prefer to do one of these. And it's just because it fits, I can set it right underneath there and give it a nice bubble. Now, something like this probably would have benefited these sunflowers a little bit more, but generally when things are in flower, they're already at the end of their life cycle, and that's why it's so hard to do stuff like this. But so, and because that's such a project, I'm not going to waste the energy to put a bubbler in there. But if it was something I did care about, like a tree or something, and I just really had to save those genetics, a lot of times I will use a bubbler like this just because I don't have to worry about it. I don't really have to worry about keeping a dome on it. It keeps it moist for me. And this particular setup, I have tried a couple different versions. But to start off, this is how I would put the plants in. So the fabulous dollar noodle that I featured in my plants and water videos, part 1 and part 2. This is actually what I used some of it for. So what I did initially is it would have come in just like this, and I just made a cut and I folded it in, kind of as tight as I could, and I just let it sit. The next day I went and I just put the plant right in here in this little piece, rolled it up, and then it just slides right into the holes that I made in the lid. Let's see if we can get this in here. Boom, something like this. Sorry, this is just algae. I'll wash it off for sure. Always disinfect before you start using your cloner again. That is also very important. A lot of people don't do that, and you're not going to experience very good results. The reason this one is so nasty after the use is because it was actually an aquaponics cloner. So to get in a little deeper, there's, again, so many different types of cloners. And sorry, guys, this will be a little bit lengthy of a video. Now, the aquaponics cloner, I had 1 guppy, 1 ghost shrimp, and 1 water snail. And the reason is because water snails, guppies, and mostly the snails and the ghost shrimp do eat plants. Now, it's not going to be at an insane rate, but that was positive for me because I needed something to eat the algae, but I needed algae present to help keep nutrients down. So basically, water in general can be sustainable in certain aspects. So adding chlorine and chloramine generally can keep it clean. Chlorine will bubble out in 24 hours, and chloramine can bubble for 2 weeks and still be present. So the plants are not going to react as well with something like that. You're going to generally want to use dechlorinated water. Now, when you dechlorinate your water, you have the chance of having certain pests and infections, and just different things can go wrong in that water. So generally, you have to take actions to make sure the water is safe, not only for yourself, but for the plants. Adding oxygen can benefit that. So since we were adding so much oxygen, it actually worked like an aeroponics. And aeroponics is where you actually take a stem. So this same setup can be used actually. And there's different versions. Maybe you put a rail system on the bottom here, or just some sprayers with some pumps stick out of the bottom there, and it just spritzes those roots. So in this case, I would have put the plant in here, and I would have stuck it about halfway. And the reason is because the water level I generally put to right here. And because with the power of I put a 20 to 60 gallon pump on it. Now that is insanely strong for those of you that know aquariums and stuff. And the reason is because I wanted it to just be spritzing constantly on those roots, just nice dripping water, and I would regulate it. So we would start up about here, I would let it go down towards the bottom, and then I would fill it back up. So that way the water level was constantly changing, and I mean, those stems had so much oxygen. They were happy as can be. This was admittedly a little slower of a system, but I had a higher success rate. So, you know, it's a give and take relationship for this. Another version of cloning I have done was like the sunflowers, I actually soaked stems or you know, my cuttings overnight in an aloe and honey mixture, like just a custom rooting hormone. I normally don't use our rooting hormone just because I don't really care for it. A lot of times it's just going to be a whole lot of aloe gel. Just take a spoon, scrape out our inside leaf from our aloe plant, and add in just a little shot of honey, mix it up, and then slowly add water to where it's kind of thoroughly mixed. I'll let that soak overnight, and I'll cut the stems at a 45 best I can. Sometimes I don't even do that. Maybe scrape it or something, just kind of, you know, mess it up. Give it more surface area to hopefully help root and absorb those nutrients. And then after that, that's generally when I'll add it into either our aquaponic, hydroponic, aeroponic cloner, that thing that we had going. Like I said, it was inspired by a number of different techniques. Or I'll add it into a wick system. So this is just something that was given to me. It wasn't supposed to be all that fancy originally. It was just a little peat brick, just like you would do for a seed starter, except it was a little larger. So I can just add seed starting mix in here. And the way a wick pot works is basically you have a container with a little hole in it. You can see I still got some seed starter stuff in there. And then this is basically a wick. A wick can be made out of so many different things. It just depends on what's in here and what are you trying to wick. So generally speaking, it's three parts. You have your container for the water, your container for the plant, and your wicking mechanism. In some systems, the wicking mechanism can actually be the roots of the plant. But initially speaking, it would be good if there's something to help with the wicking to keep the entirety of it. A good example would be a dual root zone. If you don't know what that is, I'll do another video on it later. We have experimented with it. There were some ups and downs, but this is a wick pot. So for this, all I had to do was fill it, and believe it or not, I filled it with aquaponic, really weak aquaponic water, like after I did a water change, and probably a 50%, because you really don't want nutrients. Sometimes I would just use city tap water because it is going to be sitting water with no airflow. That did me pretty well for a while. Every plant's going to be different. A big thing is just finding out what they like. So for herbs and stuff, I generally found very weak aquaponics water or fish water kind of seemed to do the trick. So this is what it would look like when it's set up. Your water reservoir would be down here. The wick would have some wicking drawing action into the pot, and then a seed starting mix has wicking action within itself, so it keeps this at the perfect water amount. So basically all I'd have to do is take the cuttings that I soaked for 24 hours, slide them right in here, and then a lot of times I don't always use humidity domes, and when I do, I make them myself. One-time use, reduce, reuse, recycle, guys. Like, you'd be amazed what you can make. The majority of this stuff I just showed you, I got for free. Somebody was getting rid of it. Maybe I did have to go buy it, but maybe I tried to get it at a flea market or off Facebook online yard sales and stuff. Just try and be resourceful. Sometimes that's half the fun. Um, so anywho, for this particular the wick pot, I actually used either a 2 or 3 liter. It didn't really matter. I would cut the bottom off in a circle, and I would leave the lid on, and that's important. Uh, and I would just set it over the top, airtight. Take it off every day, kind of fan it. With the standard spritz bottle y'all have seen me use a million times, I think I got it at maybe Tractor Supply or Walmart for like $1. We go through spray bottles all the time. There for a couple years, I actually used a hydrogen peroxide. Somebody was done with. I just rinsed it out, and boom, I had a sprayer for about 2 years for free. So you can always try something like that. As long as you have a decent sprayer that sprays out. The cone sprayers, where it sprays in a cone formation, those aren't as successful. I don't like those as much, and you definitely don't want a sprayer that's just going to be, like a straight stream. You really want a nice, even spritz. Those are going to do you best, especially when it comes to cloning. It's going to make all the difference. So I would spritz out that bottle, and then whenever they're ready, you have to harden clones off. So know that if you use a humidity dome, you have to harden off your clones. And every time you mess with these clones, you're going to have to harden it off. So the more you baby them, the more you have to harden them. Just know that. It's a give and take. If you don't baby them, you're not going to have as many successes, but you're not going to have to spend as much time with them. If you baby them, you spend more time with them, and you're going to have more successful plants. It's kind of like I said, that's your options. So anywho, with the bottle, whenever it was time to harden it off to standard humidity and standard airflow a couple times a day, you just take the lid off. That's it. That's generally those high fancy humidity domes, the high priced ones you get. They have a venting chamber. That's what the lid would do, and it still has a dome kind of action shape. So some of the humidity will go down, but it does allow nice airflow. Do note when you start messing with humidity domes, if you do not practice sanitary practices, you are going to experience mold, mildew, funguses. Be ready. There are ways to help deal with that. Generally, for us, we just use a touch of peroxide or alcohol, standard rubbing alcohol, medical alcohol, just alcohol. Just splash some into your water bottle next time. Don't make it very heavy because it will burn the plants, and they are very sensitive. But just sometimes sanitizing, again, practicing sanitary measures, sanitizing the water, things like that. Using city tap water really helps because of the chloramine and chlorine in it. It's going to help kill that off a little bit. Keyword is help. Find what works for you and your area. So that's pretty much going to be it for cloning today, guys. Again, like, subscribe. Don't be afraid to comment if you have any more questions. I am so willing to go in depth with you guys. I absolutely love this. I do this for fun. I enjoy it. So have a great day. Peace and be kind.